Hey, everybody, and welcome to Lost in the Groove. Today, we have a special guest. His name is Andy, and he's here to take us into a little bit of a time travel. We're going to go back to the 90s. So, with that, Andy, welcome. How are you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Good. So, tell me a little bit about yourself. Who is Andy?
Well, I'm a writer. I like to tell people that I used to work in a cubicle, which is true, and ended up making my what was once my hobby into my career as a writer. So, I've worked in college. I worked in just the worst restaurant jobs you could have. Everything from the deli owned by the a-hole uptight, super perfectionistic deli owner. All over the East Coast, like
All the above.
deli is the worst place to work. Washing dishes during a restaurant, and then got out of college in the mid '90s when it was kind of a switch. My parents had always told me, well, you study hard, you get a degree, you'll get this big glorious corporate job after you get out, and that kind of changed in the '90s. Like it was really, I guess, the first throes of the gig economy. So anyway, I got a job at a bank. I did the business thing for a while, learned a lot, did a lot of great things, and kind of there's always had this undercurrent of being a writer, and just ended up making it my main gig now. So I write about sports business for Forbes. Prior to that, I did about 6 years with ESPN and wrote for Rolling Stone a little bit, and put out a novel last summer called 90 Days in the 90s, a rock and roll time travel story. And it's all about, someone who's my age, who's a record store owner, who time travels back to the 1990s and kind of gets lost in the music scene in her 20s and having a little bit too much fun, doing the things that we all sort of remember that we did when we were younger and more carefree.
Well, I mean, the 90s was really an honestly crazy time for music. Well, first off, people don't remember this. There was a Woodstock that ended horribly. Then there was Lollapalooza. Nirvana was a thing, and they had their insane concerts where people were literally banging their heads against the railing because they were depressed and angry.
Mhm.
It was a different time. It was you were right. Like it was the beginning of gig. What did you call it? Gig.
I talk about the gig economy a lot because one of my 3 or 4 jobs now is I teach digital marketing and
Okay.
social media. So I kind of say to the 20 somethings who are in my class, like, okay, you grew up with the gig economy. It was kind of a new thing to have like a side hustle. Like we didn't say side hustle, but you had like 2 jobs just to pay your rent and eat ramen noodles every night. And that really kind of started. The world sort of changed from go to work for a company for 20 years or 30 years, get the company watch and a pension to, well, here's a job, good luck, and try to make it through. And if you don't like your work, too bad, go find a hobby to keep yourself sane. So that really, I think, started or became more normal in the 90s. That's why I kind of always say the gig economy is, kind of the first throes of that. And you mentioned music fest, like the 90s was the growing pains of music fest. Like now we have Riot Fest, we have Bonnaroo, we got, we can make fun of it, but you've got Coachella. Every major city, like Louisville has their thing, and Austin has a couple of them, and Portland and Eugene, or like,
Came out of the 90s.
yeah, I mean, really, like we were kind of figuring that out. We had Woodstock in the '60s, and my parents, I suppose, could have gone to it. And in the '90s, we said, yeah, getting a bunch of bands together, like thousands of people in the sun without sunscreen and adequate water. That's a really great idea. Why don't we do more of that?
Excellent.
And
Genius.
yeah, so yeah, you mentioned '90s, '90 Woodstock '99, which was really like dude bro bands and even less preparation. But it kind of grew out of the '90s, and I think we've figured it out for the most part since
I
then.
think we I think we have, but you bring up a really great point because when we look at celebrities like rock stars, especially the ones that came out of the 80s and 90s, which a lot of people listen to now. A lot of people listen to bands such as Aerosmith, Black Sabbath, Iron
Hall Notes,
Maiden,
Hall
all of
Notes is
these.
huge among the millennials.
But these a lot of these bands, like you were saying, these were people that when they started off their careers in the 70s and 80s, late 70s and 80s, they were starving artists. They were working tons of gigs, traveling constantly just to make breaks even. And I think you're right. Like a lot of that started to change in the 90s. A lot of people started to see that there was a different way of how to do this. You didn't need the man anymore to
Yeah,
make a living.
So yeah, I think the '80s. I think of like these mega artists, and not you're going to knock on them, but I mean like Springsteen and Prince and
Right.
Madonna and David Bowie kind of had his first renaissance. But I remember like so I used to watch. I still watch sports, but I watched a lot of sports in the '80s, and I remember Miller High Life had this series of commercials where they highlighted like up and coming bands, and one of them was
You
the
mean
Mighty
Miller, like the beer company?
High Life. So basically, like
Okay.
Miller High Life on the road with this band you never heard of that's really doing kind of the American dream thing. So one of the several bands that they picked was the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, which I think they were just called the Boss Tones at the time.
Okay.
Playing their ska, wearing funky suits with tartan ties and stuff like that. And
Right.
then fast forward to I think '96, they have a number one album, and it's like weird music like that was mainstream, and everybody accepted that there was room for artists that weren't Madonna or weren't huge like Prince or Springsteen. You could have all kinds of artists from all over the place, and maybe the '80s kind of was an undercurrent of that. But yeah, I talked about music all day long. I'm not by any means a expert or a music historian, but
Neither am I.
we all overtake. So
It's just, it's just a really it's just a great thing to think about because music really shapes our culture. And being that you're a writer and you're somebody that gets to talk and be able to put down on a piece of sheet of paper, like explaining, showing people, kind of opening people's eyes to something that they wouldn't have seen before. There's something really incredible about an author because you have the ability to sit there and write something, inspire other people, have people be engaged in what you're creating. Um, there's something really beautiful about that. That
well, thanks.
Yeah,
Well,
of
so one
course,
so one thing that Gen X we all kind of grew up on TV, and we all we read books too, but we grew up a lot. I think visualizing the world from TVs and movies and stuff like MTV. And so what I always write in the book, first thing you do is you try to figure out whether or not you can write a book. So I'll fast track this by saying I was influenced by a handful of movies in the '90s where you just hang out with the characters in the movie. So like Pulp Fiction was like that. Friday
of
was like
course.
that. Days Confused was like that. Yeah, there's probably you could figure out a lead character, protagonist, and some things that were overcome. Some ups and downs. But by and large, in those three movies, and a lot of movies were like this in the '90s, and maybe books were like this in the '80s. Like you just kind of hung out with the people who were the characters and felt what they were feeling and became part of their conversations. And that was really what I went once I kind of figured out what I was doing in writing ideas in the '90s and wanting to make it about music. That's kind of I guess the theme I tried to follow, and I think I mostly pulled it off. But it wasn't about explaining, as you to use your word, is more about come along for the ride, and I think that's how we did it.
I think that's even better. I mean, because like if you come along the ride, you don't know what you're going to expect, but come on, it's going to be fun. It's got to be.
Yeah, unless you're completely boring or you're square and don't want to take any risks. When I first shopped the novel to literary agents, I got a lot of like, this is a quiet novel, and like not if you get past the first 50, like agents want you to send like the first 25 or 50 pages, but sometimes shit doesn't happen in life, in the first chapter.
With your book, you said it's kind of like low key. What do you mean that it's like low key?
Yeah, I think it's just when you're writing a book, you spend some time trying to figure out how to do that, and then you go, oh crap, I got to write 70 to 100,000 words and make it readable for the audience, not just cool stuff I'm putting out on a page that inspires me. So I don't know. I was told that it was kind of low key in that I think it has a soft takeoff maybe, and I would think that so. The thing about time travel is in every movie that we've seen or every book we've read, it is there's a problem obviously that Marty McFly or Bill and Ted or somebody needs to solve, and there's also this big thing where they've got to make sure they still exist, or in other ones there's you got to prevent JFK from getting shot, or you got to kill Hitler or something like that. And I thought about the fact that if you or I could time travel, we would probably just go back in time and do some things that were fun to us, or see some things that were familiar, or maybe go see a show or experience something that in the past was fun. And so
Yeah. I
it doesn't.
would Honestly, for me, if I can go back in time, I know this may sound very cheesy. I would go back to Woodstock.
Okay. To experience it, not
Yeah,
to better Woodstock or to prevent Woodstock from happening or to make sure that Jimi Hendrix played earlier than like yeah, I think he played at like 5 in the morning because everything was so behind. Like
I would be there at 4:45.
you would
Okay,
need to correct. Well, the thing is, like, you wouldn't need to correct it. You're not like, oh crap, we
no,
got to fix this and we got to make this better.
no,
We got to make sure that Vietnam doesn't happen, and we got to make sure that George Wallace, gets, I don't know, offed so that he doesn't do these horrible things. Like, it's more like I would just go
I
back and
know.
experience some fun things and take in the experience. So that was sort of what I wanted for the book. I mean, there are some subplots and some things that Darby, the main character, has to deal with. A lot of it's about her dealing with her personal shit, but yeah. And then the other thing is like she goes back to kind of fix some things and gets caught up back in time, just experiencing and loving the moment. So there's a good and bad that comes with that. But I think most people, and that's maybe what makes it chill. I just kind of want you to hang out with the characters and come along for the ride. And when I was kind of beta testing this with my friends who like read 5 books a month, I said it to a couple of them, like, read this, tell me if it's good or not. But more than anything, tell me, do you feel like you're hanging out with the characters or do you feel like you're a third wheel and you're not included in that? Because that was really important to me. And they all said, yeah, I kind of felt like I was hanging out with the people, whether I knew them or not, or whether or not they're people I would hang out with, like I was along for the ride. And that was what I went for.
Well, you mentioned earlier a bunch of movies that you felt inspired to, such as like Dazed and Confused and Pulp Fiction.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, the experience that I got out of these films was just enjoying the ride. Okay, I'm going to use this as an example. If you take a movie like Pulp Fiction, it's insane. Like you have characters that they're nutcrackers. Like these are people that have mental illnesses 100%, but they're so fun. They're so fun. And it's like each scene you think you know what's going to happen, but no. No, it just out of nowhere pure insanity comes out of just um thin air, as you would put it. It's all about just getting in there, reading the story, and then coming out of it and being like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I guess if you were on a stakeout, if you were working for a gangster like Marcellus Wallace, you would need somebody like Samuel L. Jackson's characters to be, kind of driving for you and sort of getting business done. Uh,
Right. I never thought about it like that.
yeah, I mean, but the thing is, like, if you worked at Burger King and he was your manager, like either you'd hate it or enjoy it, but like shit would get done. It wouldn't be like, oh, I got another 4 hours before I go home. Your manager would come in and you'd learn to make the burgers right, or you'd be out of there pretty quickly.
Right.
So I don't know. I think there's something to strong characters, whether they are strong characters that are type A and yelling at you, or they're super chill. I can think of like Slater and Dazed and Confused. Like he doesn't really do much but hang out and maybe philosophize a little bit and smoke a bit of weed. But he's not a weak character because he doesn't save the day or because he's not hooking up with a girl. I think that
He's
there
not
are
supposed to. He's not supposed to save the day.
no, and not everybody has to be Marty McFly or I mean Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I love that movie in part for a lot of nostalgic reasons, but that they're the most unlikely heroes that kind of pull it together on their own terms to make that story in the movie work. And it's a great history lesson to watch that movie too. If you didn't know who Socrates was, you probably want to know, you know, who he was just to figure out
Yeah.
what to do with that character wearing the robe or whatever. But yeah, I mean, there's I'm not a huge TV watcher, but I've tried to watch shows like 24, like because it's on Amazon or whatever now, and it's like I can't relate to Jack Bauer enough to really connect with what's going on. But I love James Bond films probably because he likes to drink whiskey and he's got
His Aston Martin. Come on.
yeah.
When he gets into that Aston Martin, and he's like speeding down the highway, you're like, oh,
Well,
James Bond means business.
yeah, but he always has time to like if he's in a nice hotel, like Daniel Craig James Bond, he has time to hit the pool before he's going to go on some stakeout to do whatever. So there's something about that I think is more relatable than TikTok. I gotta figure this bomb out before. Oh, let's go to commercial. See you next week. I don't know. I want a little bit
It's a
more.
different. Okay. Look, the way that I view it is like this. I can say this because we both experienced this. When we wanted to watch a movie,
Mhm.
we, for me as a kid, we had two options. One, you would go to the movie theater,
Yeah.
okay, or you can go ahead and pick it up at a Blockbuster and rent it.
Yeah.
And there was always option three, which you always can watch it on Showtime or HBO or whatever. But we didn't have any of that. Um, so it was a very physical experience. If you wanted to do something, you had to do it. There was no like open up your phone and then it's right there. So I'm not saying that it was better. I'm just saying that I feel that it changes and gives you a little bit more of an appreciation because you're now investing your time in this. You literally just drove 2 miles to pick this thing up. You want to invest in this for like the next 2 hours.
And maybe it's conditioned how we consume music now because so my parents, I presume, went to the drive-in. I went to a drive-in once or twice my whole life because they didn't really they were I guess they weren't profitable and yeah, I mean I think we went to see some boring ass movie and then that weird turnaround. I remember seeing like some like rip off of ET. And the feature that was showing behind us was this terrible movie called Hard Bodies, which was like the most sophomoric, misogynistic, stupid movie you could think of. I looked it up afterwards. Um, and I remember just seeing like boobs every 20 minutes. And,
Great movie.
you know, I was 13,
Right
so
there.
I had to turn around. I was like, what are they watching behind us? But yeah, so now like but and then also at the same time in the 80s at least, like you'd turn on the radio and if you don't like what's on the radio, then you probably end up listening to alternative music or finding a college station if you're sick of Bon Jovi 4 times a day or every hour. So I think it informs like I've got a 16-year-old son who likes a lot of the music that I like and when he was like 12 or 13 we both signed up for paid Spotify accounts because to me it felt like going through the record store where you could listen to something, really see if you want to listen to it or not. And so I see him and his friends, and I do live in the city, and I know that he's attuned to my music too. But I find that Generation Z is a little bit more curious than maybe even my generation, definitely more than millennials, about searching out like, oh, I like, I'll give you an example. Like I like the artist Sky Ferreira a lot, and she's not definitely not as famous as like Taylor Swift, who's in town in Chicago tonight this
Right.
weekend, by the way, or Britney Spears. I think she's better in terms of her songwriting, but so she's a little dark, she's a little alternative,
Agreed.
and I found it could be the weed, and she's a little bit bad girl, but I found other artists that sound like her. Like I just found this one yesterday. Let me gotta look up her name now.
Well,
I think
there
it's
was
Tal is her
mhm,
name, and then I found like there's a Austin-based artist named Aria, and there's one in LA called Caroline Loveglow, and they're all kind of like the downbeat alternative with a little bit of pop. You could listen to it if you're just kind of pensive, or you listen to it if you're stoned if you want. And it's not in your face as much. And now I'm like, I know there's got to be at least another dozen artists that are the same approach to music that I want to find, and I love that about Spotify, and I love that the youngest generation that's into music right now is like curious to find out like oh, I like Dinosaur Jr. So they're kind of garage rock. So am I going to like stuff from the late 60s that I can grab on Spotify and make a choice to go check out versus just turn on the radio and listen to whatever everybody else is listening to? Anyway, that's my thesis on music right now.
no, I completely agree with you. Like I love hearing and experiencing other artists. I've had other artists on this show. I had recently, a few weeks ago, I purchased a guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and the gal that helped me out, she's a singer and songwriter, and she does I think it's alternative pop.
Yeah.
I don't want to misquote, but her name's Leah Simmons,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, this is amazing. This is totally like you get a little bit of early 2000s, you get a little bit of 90s, a little bit of country.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's really great what technology has allowed us because just like Spotify, it's
Found her. Is
allowed you.
that her?
That's her. That's
Sweet.
Leah
All right.
Simmons. She's
I'm gonna check it out. I'll
um
probably like it. Anyway, so she sold you a guitar. Do you know how to play guitar yet?
yeah, I do.
Okay.
I've
Good.
been learning how to play guitar for the past 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and I just came to the realization that it's time for a new guitar. I need something a little heavier neck, a little bigger body, you know?
They're like tattoos. You grab one, you're gonna see one in the garage sale that you don't need that you can afford, and then you're like, well, I like Strats. Maybe we'll get a Mexican Stratocaster because I hear that they have a special thing. Like we're that like that in my household. So yeah, I totally get it. You know, it's a good hobby to have, I think.
But it's even better when you're able, for me, when I was able to make that connection with that person. Um, I just, again, like, I feel that there was a lot of benefits growing up, but there's a lot of benefits now. Like, you could use this as such a great tool. You know, like you were saying with your son, you're able to bond and be able to experience all of this music. We don't realize, I didn't realize how much I had at my fingertips until I was like, whoa.
Yeah, I mean, I think the world has always been user friendly for those who get off their seat. And I think we could listen to probably my grandparents or your grandparents be like, oh, Woodstock was the greatest and it's never going to be like that again. But last Sunday night, because it was Memorial Day, there was no school the next day. There's a band called the Subhumans that was in town. These guys are like probably 62 or so, UK band that kind of was cut from the cloth of the Sex Pistols, but kind of started after they broke up.
Oh,
And these
that
guys were
sounds
like,
so. Hold on.
so
This sounds so
so
familiar. Yeah, go on.
yeah. So imagine you got old Cockney guys on stage. You're like, fuck the Queen and or the King, I guess now. And they're talking about worker conditions and corporate America, and the lead
This is
singer's
it.
like,
Wait. Let me see. I have
yeah,
to.
yeah, that's
I have
them.
to.
Yeah. So I'm
There it
talking about,
is.
yeah, that's totally them. So it's I'm talking about the time that when I was
Ooh.
crowd surfing and I actually got dropped on my head seeing a band in Cincinnati. I'm kind of saying to my son, like, don't go up there. There's going to be some people moshing or slam dancing. It's going to get a little rough. Don't feel like you need to do that. You're not allowed to do that while you're here with me because I don't, because as a sports writer, I've interviewed professional athletes, but I've also interviewed athletes that like have had spinal cord injuries, and I'm like, you don't go up there. Just like let's enjoy the music. And
Yeah.
then shit gets a little wild up front, and his one of his best friends, who's also 16, goes up and starts slam dancing with these people who are like, built like linebackers and just. So that was our Sunday night entertainment to see like $13 to see this band from the early '80s who are waxing poetic about worker conditions and F this and F that. It was great. It was like so authentic to see that this band is still doing the same things that I assume that they were doing in 1981 and '82 at some crappy bar in South London. They haven't changed, and the crowd is sort of a mix of people my age and my son's age and everything in between. And it definitely wasn't a bunch of people sitting down with their arms folded just listening to music. It was pretty live for
It was you. You're a part of the music. Like you're a part
totally.
of that experience. And I will say this. Like you talk about the Subhumans. You know, like the Dead Kennedys is a great example of this. You go to a Dead Kennedys concert. First of all, it's not that expensive. It's actually pretty affordable, which is crazy.
Yeah,
And you get to see Jello Biafra like on the stage, looking like a fucking demon, screaming on the mic.
yeah,
And you're right. There are ways of you still like being a part of these experiences, like being a part of the music. Yes, Woodstock may never happen again. Okay, boohoo. But we can make other experiences. We can enjoy other types of music and people that have been fucking rocking since 1983, honey.
yeah. I
I
mean,
love that.
Keith Richards is still alive, and I think Jerry
I
Lewis
know.
is still alive too. So it's like, um, yeah. There's. I mean, I think that I grew up. So I'll say this in the '80s, it was kind of like this was us, Generation X. Like if you were into the Cure or the Smiths or Husker Du, like you would never say like, oh, I really love that Def Leppard song. I kind of like some metal. It was just something you didn't do, and now we're way past that. Um,
I love that. I
it's
love
not.
that finally somebody admits to it.
It was kind of comical. I mean, it was be like, I mean, part of it was that you grow up with what you are spoon fed, what you know, and so a lot of time, like I'll put it this way, like before I knew about alternative music, I loved Huey Lewis and the News, and it's still like their music is still great pop. It's actually like there's a lot of bad pop, but Huey Lewis and the News is kind of middle two or three albums are like it's good songwriting, it's great pop, and I know they're not touring anymore because Huey Lewis has basically gone deaf. But it must have been a fun show as an adult because I would go if they were still playing, just like I would go see the Subhumans or I would go see Sky Ferreira if she'd ever start touring again. I hope she does because I've never seen her.
Do you know, by the way, do you know who I recently saw in concert? Blondie.
Oh, nice. You saw them?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
saw her on I saw her
they're
on
the same age.
stage.
I mean, they're probably like the same age as the Subhumans, and they've probably hung out drinking in the same
Uh
bar backstage.
she's she's in her 80s.
No, she's not. She can't be that old. Debbie
She
Harry?
I think late 70s,
Yeah.
early 80s.
Yeah. Well, now you piqued my interest. I want to know. Yeah, she's got to be like pushing my dad's
But
age.
I
Debbie
was
Harry,
like,
77. Yeah, she's 77 years old.
yeah, she's yeah, and I'm like, she was up on that stage twirling,
Killing it.
okay? Twirling to Rapture. And I was just like, that is fucking music. I have two of their vinyl records.
Nice.
And, you know, I love that. I love that experience of these artists that just, they do it because that's what they do.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
Yeah, and I think that it's I do like that Bruce Springsteen is still doing it. It's funny. A couple years ago, I was in New York with my family, and um, let's say it was about 5 years ago. So I think it's pre-pandemic. Anyway, Bruce Springsteen is playing nightly at the Walter Kerr Theater, which is in what used to be Hell's Kitchen, and now it's a little more upscale. And
Hmm.
my kid goes, "We should see Springsteen while we're here." I'm like, "Do you have $1,500?" Because I don't, because that's what it was going for, like three
Yeah.
people to go. And I'm glad that he can do that, but at the same time, I'm glad that he is a premium artist. That he is doing these small, like instead of doing giant stadium, he's doing these these smaller venues that I mean, yeah, there's a price to pay. It's probably not all that he's doing. Just
You
like
know that
Elton. Go ahead.
You know that John Lennon predicted that Bruce Springsteen would be like huge.
Huh, didn't
And
know
yeah, he did, and it was really crazy because I was reading that and like,
that.
sorry. I mean, you're right. When you take like some of these celebrities, I just recently saw Aerosmith take. This is crazy. Aerosmith is coming down here to Florida.
Okay.
Okay, they're charging $995 for basic seats that is in front of a giant television.
Hmm.
$995. Kudos to them. I'm just saying that you know, I'm happy for them, but it's a lot of money.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the good thing about these music fests is that, I mean, yeah, it might cost you $125 to get into Riot Fest for one day. I usually pick a day that I go to see all the artists. You do get to see a lot, and you do get your money's worth. And I'm probably, I don't know. I remember Fire Fest several years ago, where it was like all this money to see all these artists that were going to show up, and then the whole thing fell apart. Great concept, not executed very well. Don't know if they'll ever do a music fest on a Bahamian island at some point. But yeah, I mean, it's like I was complaining that New Order a couple of years ago, it was probably going on 10 years ago when they were, Peter Hook, I think, was still involved, that they were charging like $200 for tickets into like a large theater here. And I was kind of complaining, like, you guys are greedy like Steely Dan. But, at the same time, they got to make, they're artists.
The biggest problem with New Order though is because of what was his name? Ian Curtis. Ian Curtis, when they originally like were formed before he passed,
Mhm,
a lot of their fan base
mhm,
stems from there. And after he passed, these people pass it over to their kids. Because that was the music that they listened to. And
mhm.
then you had New Order, and then people started to get along with that. Um, the biggest problem I always had was like you had like the two sides because it was a very big issue with them. It's like, hey, remember where you came from. Remember
Yeah.
who started you.
So it's,
You know?
you're kind of getting, there is a New Order crowd that's very much a Depeche Mode fans.
Yes.
And then there's others who are more Joy Division who,
Yes.
I mean, they're probably not going to play Transmission or Atmosphere as much. It's weird. I've heard a couple of punk bands play covers of Atmosphere. One was like Codeine, who hasn't recorded in a long time, did a cover of Atmosphere, which sounds just like the original. Yeah,
It's
there's that.
beautiful.
But I mean, it's like I love Slater Kinney. The last time I saw Slater Kinney was like 2003. Now the tickets sell out so fast. It's because people know them from Portlandia, and I'm glad that they have a following. I'm not going to complain about be like, well, I was into Slater Kinney before they became famous thanks to Portlandia. I mean, I do like the earlier stuff, everything from the Woods on, from about 2005 on.
Yeah, but
I'm not really into. Some people,
people really got a new taste of what they were doing from Portlandia. Like I
yeah,
know this because I had a friend that was really into this music. She was telling me that, you know, it's like some people prefer bananas, some people prefer strawberries. You know, you're going to take what you want. You can either mix it or choose either or either. You know, it's like it is what it is. But
so I like the bananas before they were fully ripe, and now the super sweet, overly ripe bananas aren't really my thing. But
I love
Colin,
that.
if I get a chance, if I ever even actually get the tickets before they sell to see Slater Kinney again, I know they're going to play stuff from their second and third album. They're not just going to play their most recent album encore. I don't know, cover of a Sheryl Crow song. Like they're not built like that, and it's just the way. I'm glad that they get to be artists and keep doing what they do instead of not that there's anything wrong with it, but like Buffalo Tom, they're not going to tour anymore. Bill Janovitz is doing his real estate thing up in Boston, and they probably will tour again. They'll probably do a small tour, and I'll not get tickets to the show. But
There's
different art.
very
Go ahead.
I feel like though there's very few maybe this is just me. I feel like there's very few artists that came out of that period. Okay, we're talking about like late 70s, 80s or throughout the 70s, whatever. Um that kind of like was able to stay in their realm
Yeah.
and be able to continue with that. I mean, there was David Bowie, but he passed away in 2017. There's Elton John, but after what happened with him and Dua Lipa, I'm just like, I don't know.
Well,
I'm
there's, I mean, okay, so that's with big artists, but so
yeah,
the English beat comes here to Chicago in normal times. They're probably starting to come back like twice a year. And I don't know if Dave Wakeling has like a girlfriend here, or if he's just got buddies. Like, why Chicago and why Milwaukee? Because he'll introduce the band, and he still lives, I think, in the UK for the most part. He maybe has,
right.
but like his drummer. I'm just going making this up, but I mean it's like pretty close. It's like his guitarist lives in LA, the main drummer lives in San Francisco. The keyboardists live in Boston. They all assemble when it's time to do a stateside tour, and it's kind of cool to see that. Marcy does the same thing. Like I had a friend who lived in Wrigleyville, who I remember one time we're standing. This is in like the mid '90s. We're standing outside of her house on a Saturday. Someone's playing drums. I'm like, "What's going on here?" It's like, "Oh, that's the drummer from that band that has a song about like I feel like a newborn baby." I'm like, "Filter." Yeah, Filter's drummer is from Chicago. Like when they're not touring, he lives here. Can't remember the drummer's name, but now he plays with Marcy. And I know that Marcy doesn't live in Chicago, and maybe the drummer lives in LA now. But yeah, they kind of assemble their band and do like clockwork. They got it down. The musicians are good enough that they can just pick up wherever. And you do. I mean, I am seeing a lot of like very late '70s, early '80s stuff revived, and artists that maybe aren't as big as David Bowie and maybe New Order
Right.
is now, but they're still out there. I mean, that's the cool part about all these different levels of music and different size venues is that okay, you're maybe never going to see Culture Club do what they did in the early '80s again. If you get Boy George in a good mood to tour with the band and they're getting along and they don't cancel the tour in the middle, okay, so maybe you don't keep, but the Go Go's will do a West Coast tour and English Beat's still out there, and there's all kinds of different artists that you just got to kind of put your feelers out, and then you see like, oh crap, I didn't know this band was back together, like, and I missed them. What was I thinking? That's the cool part about being a music fan, I
Well,
guess.
the thing is, you mentioned like with the UK. So here's the deal, though. I feel the UK is one of the coolest cultures for music because a lot of these old bands, they're still very true to what music that they make. And what
Hmm.
happens is, and I've seen this because I have a friend that's out there. There's these little groups, like little bands that pop up, and they emulate those. Whether it be post-Soviet punk, um, ska punk, or just different genres of music, even metal. And you can find them like anywhere on social media. They're not like big, but they're all inspired by this like culture of music. It's just a weird place. It's just a weird place where music came from.
Yeah, now you got the Future Islands, who are from Maryland. Their lead singer half the time is singing with a fake German accent. I mean, I think that they're musically adept and they've got to think. Well, I'm kind of like, why are you singing with a German accent, dude? You're not German. Like I don't. And some of their fans are like, you don't get it, so shut up. I've really like wrangled with Future Islands fans on social media because I'm like, yeah, this guy dresses like an accountant and he sings like he's German, but he's not. But I mean, some people like their shows sell out. Like people follow them, and maybe if you're into synth pop, you got a hankering for a German accent every once in a while. I don't know what it is. So I'm glad that nobody from the U.S. is touring or doing records with like the fake English accent singer. But I've seen Swerve Driver and like when they talk on the mic and they're like, "Oh, this is a lovely venue. It's great. Thanks for coming." And then like when they're singing, they sound like these kind of chill dudes who just have an American accent that that are kind of dark. And I love their music, but I don't know if they're putting it on or it's just a style of singing that. Yeah, I mean that's you got to be game for that if you're a music fan too. That you're going to hear a techno band with a fake German singer or a Germanish influenced singer who's from Maryland, or these guys from England who wish they're from Southern California and they had dreads. Now they don't have. So I'll give you a funny story. Years ago, I went to see. I had a friend who was my friend Mogan is like a roadie basically, and he was like a stage manager at Metro, and he put out on Facebook like, "Hey, I got access to Social Distortion. Who wants to come with me?" I'm like, "Dude, me." So we saw him at the House of Blues. It's funny because like the next morning we were so hungover separately that like you didn't we remember that much, but we're kind of like a box. Like he had great seats,
Hmm.
and I'm looking down at the crowd, and it's people like my age, and you could tell it's all a bunch of guys who used to have pompadours. Like they still comb their hair back, and they still got some hair, but they're mostly bald. But they still got like the black t-shirts, and they still look like punks. Like yeah, there were a lot of former pompadour people. Like people who got dudes who used to slick back their hair at the show that don't really have it, but anymore. But they're still showing up the show and still seeing the same band. It's just
It's
slightly
nostalgia,
bigger,
man.
slightly bigger venue, slightly less hair on the top of the head.
The best thing that I ever saw was I went to a venue here in Fort Lauderdale, and
Hmm.
it was punk, and there was a guy there. He was 72,
Okay.
and I remember I walked up to him. He's like, "Listen," he says, "I've been to Studio 54." He says, "I've been to CBGB's. I've seen the Ramones live." He says, "I don't care if I got back problems, knee problems." He says, "I'm going to get my ass out whenever I can get to a punk show." And I was like, bro, that is a life. Can you imagine you're 72 and you just keep on going at it? Good for him.
Talk to me in 20 years. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, before the pandemic, I went to Speed Weeks, NASCAR in Daytona. I'm on
Oh,
the airplane.
nice.
I'm flying coach. I'm sitting next to this guy who looks exactly like Childish Gambino, Donald Glover. And he's a little short. I mean, no, it's not him, but at the end of the flight, we're getting ready to land. I'm like, I know you get this all the time, but you look just like Childish Gambino. And he's like, oh, yeah, I kind of know his music. Not really. I am a musician. And we talk about that for a few minutes. I'm like, oh, what do you do? It's like, oh, I'm part of this band that I joined a couple of years ago. We're here to play Pensacola. I'm like, oh, what's the name of your band? He's like, Steel Pulse. I'm like, oh, that's why there's half a dozen old guys with dreads all over this airplane. The guys who are like my dad's age with long dreads, like Steel Pulse, one of the legendary, you know, British reggae bands, second wave reggae. Like these guys are legendary, and they're just sitting in the airplane next to me and around me. And I was like, huh, that's what life is like now. I'm on a plane with Steel Pulse, and we're pulling into Daytona. I couldn't see the show. I had something going on that night, unfortunately. But
Damn.
yeah, that was just like that's
That'd
something
be
to brag
so
about.
real.
Like, dude, yeah, I flew to Daytona. I got to interview Chase Elliott, and then Steel Pulse was on my plane. Like,
I mean, I
I don't know.
feel though if you went to like a Steel Pulse show, it'd be so cloudy, just the amount of smoke
Yeah, I
from the
think that they're
joint.
playing a small club. Like, I don't think that they're playing a huge venue. I don't know exactly where they're playing. I could probably look it up,
Well,
but
I'll be honest with you, reggae for me, it's not really great in large. It's great in outdoor like large venues, but indoors it's better when it's small. I don't
yeah,
know
yeah.
why. It
Well,
just
same with the Subhumans. I mean, I was at the Cobra Lounge and it was standing room only. I wouldn't want to see them in a theater with seats. That would completely suck.
no seats.
Yeah. So,
That's
yeah, well,
weird. There are some like shows I've been to where there's seats and like I don't want to sit.
Yeah,
I want to dance. Why are you giving? Why am I paying for a chair?
yeah. You're not there to see Kenny G or David Sanborn. So I don't know. You probably get lots of that in Florida though. Like some people with a lot of smooth jazz and bad taste in music. But I'm glad the punk comes down and the reggae's there, and you just maybe got to look a little harder to find it if you
Well,
know.
yeah, garbage is coming. Garbage is coming out, which is really cool. I didn't get tickets, but there's a club out here. I think it's called a Culture Club. They have a lot of punk, Soviet punk, like Depeche Mode kind of style, like new wave
Hmm.
and freestyle and stuff like that. And there's a lot of there's a lot of culture that's coming back. Like I totally can hear like people shifting to that sound, to that feeling. There is this like wanting in a way of going back to the 90s.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
kind
I
of
think
part.
we can bag on streaming and Spotify. We know that the what the artists get paid in terms of royalties is not great because I mean, like, you and I can just access what we want on Spotify on demand, but they're really getting the same royalty rate as something that comes on randomly on the radio. But I do feel like it's created this diversity in terms of what is well, like our musical interests and what we're more likely to go out and listen to. I think a lot of people, can't speak for everybody, but it's more diverse than what it was in the 80s and even in the 90s. Like I remember, I like shoegaze music. I remember loving when I heard it come out, Chapter House. It was like on college radio in '91, and then it wasn't played anymore. And it was years and years. I mean, I think you'd have to go to a big record store in a college town, like the Princeton Record Exchange. I grew up in the East Coast, or
Tower
Amoeba in
Records,
LA.
where I grew up. We had
Yeah,
Tower Records.
you even find that now. You can order it online. I do buy some things, even though now I don't have a CD player anymore. But you can stream it and you can listen to it. Whereas it was really difficult to find something that wasn't major label, or even in the '90s. You know, I guess the major labels had their punk labels and kind of did that song and dance for a while. But there's so much more that you can find out there and listen to, and so many different sounds. And it does encourage these artists to play shows when they know that they've got, whether it's just around where they live. If it's an LA band, maybe they're not going to come to Chicago, but they'll tour the West Coast, or an English band. Like I can't say that I think that Chapter House is ever going to come to Chicago, but I mean they're probably, if they get it back together, they could sell out some shows and make some money and play their music. And I think that happens a lot because we have many more avenues now to discover and listen to music, that it does kind of take the stuff that was in the back seat and on dust on the shelves and all that, to bring it so curious people like you and me can listen to it now, and not just only listen to Taylor Swift because that's what else on the radio. Now, there's anything wrong with that, but there's so much more to music than the top 40 artists
Right.
out there.
There's something that I really like love, especially about culture, because down here in South Florida, there's a lot of hippies. There's a lot of reggae, a lot of ska. There's a lot of geeks and nerds and people that just want different things. So you get a lot of quirky stuff that comes out here, interesting music, old bands. Um, but the thing is, it sparks creativity. Especially like when you're an artist, it really helps you engage and helps your imagination kind of flourish and grow. Um, I find that just to be absolutely amazing that we're able to do that now more than ever, because I can say when I was a kid, you were very limited of what you heard and where you got your information from.
And I do have to give props to some creative people. Like I'm not a super fan of Stranger Things or of Kate Bush, but the fact that they put her song on their an episode of last year's Stranger Things, and now all the people all over the world are like, whoa! Either I remember the song, it was great when it came out, or what is this? I want more of this. And now Kate Bush is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We can argue about whether she should be there or not, or there's a lot of great
Well,
artists that are not.
she was a very interesting artist because she started her career very young. So her first song I think was "Running Up the Hill," Not Running Up the Hill. It came out in 1977. I think she was around like 17 or 16 years old at the time. Her whole story is very controversial. So there's a lot of benefit to this because it raises awareness for this person,
Mhm.
in her career and what she went through.
Mhm.
Because she wasn't very big in the 80s at all.
Yeah, she was in the kind of the college radio circuit when this woman's work came out. I think it. By the time I probably heard it in the U.S., it was like 7 or 8 years old, or at least 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
And then they kind of. I remember. So an artist that probably isn't famous anymore, that was famous in the '90s, was an R&B singer called Maxwell. Very extremely handsome. He actually had MTV Unplugged did like their own version of Maxwell Live, and one of the songs that he played was this woman's work, and he talked about Kate Bush, how great she was and how influential. So I'm wondering now that there's this whole younger generation of Gen Z who have watched Stranger Things, they've heard that song, they know who Kate Bush is. How many of them are going to be like, I want to do a song like her. I want to find more artists like her that I can listen to. And that wasn't really on the table, a year or two ago because, again, like her singles were maybe a little dusty on the shelf, and now there's this whole I guess wave of people who know who she is and what she's done now, and that's going to have an effect in music, hopefully, at some point.
Well, there's no more pushed agenda because now there's freedom of creation. Because now you can experience anything, any type of music that you want. You want to talk about dusty shells? You can listen to music that was recorded on an old camcorder. I'm serious. I saw this on YouTube. That was taken in 1981 of a band in CBGBs. It's shitty. The quality is garbage. You're able to see this band that no longer exists. Probably all the members, unfortunately, passed away due to drug
Mm-hmm.
abuse.
Yeah.
But you can go online and watch this. Think about going back 20 or 30 years ago. No one saw that clip except the guy that recorded that,
Yeah.
and the people that were there that night.
Yeah. I've,
Um,
I've gone and a friend of mine was like, check out this 1982 show, Bad Brains at CBGB. And I thought, like, I'm not going to be able to find this. And it was right there. And I'm watching it. I'm thinking, like, there's people, that, like, this is 1982. That's a long ass time ago. I was 10 years old when that happened. Of course, I wasn't going to go to the show when I was 10 years old. Um, but then it caused me to go, like, watch Live Aid, because I watched Live Aid on TV. I was really for a short time, I was into metal. I love Judas Priest. So, like, if I remember right, it was like Joan Baez comes on stage. This is this high noon in Philly, because I grew up in the Philadelphia area.
mhm.
Joan Baez sings a song or two without any instrumentation. Then Billy Ocean comes on.
Okay.
Then it was on TV. The next thing that was on was Judas Priest, and their leather with a friggin' motorcycle on the stage.
Oh, that's
Like
beautiful.
Billy
Harley,
Ocean,
the Black
Billy
Harley.
Ocean, yeah. Like, and
Oh, mm,
I
it's
think,
a
and
sexy motorcycle.
Rob Halford was out among people who knew him, but probably most metal fans didn't know that, like, no shirt, leather vest, and studs. Like Marlon Brando hat. That he was kind of showing off his culture there on international TV. And I'm like, Judas Priest rocks. Um, yeah, that was just that was so eclectic as a music fest, I guess, or just a concert series. But yeah, I mean, I go back and watch those things now sometimes if I can't sleep at night or I'm just interested, or be like, I wonder if there's if I that show that I saw there. So I'll give you an example. So I saw Fugazi play in Chicago here for $6. When my friend got the tickets, I was like, you really $6? Really? That's it? There's no. He's like,
What
well,
year
no.
was this? Come on, what
Uh,
year was this?
I think this was in 1998, if I remember right. It
Six
was
bucks? Really?
so well. Fugazi does the whole thing where they really circumvent um, Ticketmaster. They would play at a high school gym if that's the venue. So there's a place.
Oh, that's why. Okay.
Yeah. So they played the Congress Theater, which was open sometimes and was probably in need of repair and had amazing acoustics, even though there was paint falling off the ceiling. And yeah, they don't have like a huge lights and sound system, and they sounded great. And it was $6. I got to see Fugazi play, and so my best friend who I went to the show with was like, "Oh, I found it! I found the show we went to." I'm like, "Are you sure it's the show?" And like, I guess I watched it on YouTube, and it was as best I could remember it, like guys on stage with like lights over them, not flashing lights and concert stuff. It was just like Yeah, like dudes hanging out in your basement playing a show. That's what it was like. But it was amazing. Their sound was actually amazing. And I got to watch it again. And it kind of took me back to, you don't remember everything, but you kind of can remember how you felt and estimate, the songs you remembered. And that's part of getting old. But it was like I was there. I was there for a minute or two, again, watching the show that I was actually at in 98.
How crazy is that you're able to experience that?
Yeah. It's kind of out of body a little bit, but,
Yeah.
you know, it's great. It's we can bag on media and technology. There's a lot of bad things about it, but yeah, I don't know. So what's AI going to do? Is AI going to create this virtual reality, where actually like be standing at the show and see the band on stage? If that
Well,
happens, it would be strange and cool, and we'll just have to see what happens, I guess.
Well, I think of it as like Star Trek. Okay, you have the holodeck. All right, I love the holodeck because it's so cool. Can you imagine? You can go into this thing and you're like, computer, program simulation. And you could program which person. You can have Neil Simmons. You could have anybody. I mean, you could be in that concert if you want to. You could just be like, take me back to this, and then you're in the concert. Um, I think I probably will be long time dead before that even happens, but it's a dream.
Yeah, I want to jam with Eddie Van Halen, and I want Janis Joplin to sing with me, and I want I don't know, Taylor Hawkins on drums, and I want Charlie Mingus to play bass with us. Okay, go, like, I don't know. I suppose that's conceivable and crazy at the same time, and maybe I have no business being there, but I guess that's we'll see. We'll come back from the grave in 200 years and see if people are doing that, just jamming with Charlie Mingus and Eddie Van Halen and Janis Joplin, and it's like an AI experience.
That would be a really crazy experience to meet like Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, because like here's the deal, y'all. These are they were like unnormal artists.
Yeah, yeah, they definitely broke some ground for sure.
Yeah. And it's just I don't know. I find it very interesting when listening to music. I want to understand the artists that are behind it. I want to know like who made this? Like whose genius idea was this to put this thing together?
Well, you mentioned English culture. I mean, we remember that Jimi Hendrix had to go to the UK to get a record contract, and so did Chrissy Hines too. I mean, I think Chrissy Hines wanted to move to the punk scene in the late '70s anyway. Definitely watched the series called Pistol, which was on FX if you haven't seen it, because she's profiled in it. But I mean, I've always been an Anglophile. I've always thought like some of the best music really comes from the UK. Like, why is it that American blues found its way in rock and roll through the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin, and we idiots in the US didn't figure out that until someone else in the UK did it? I think that there may be distance. Distance creates some 2020 vision, I guess. At least it did in the '60s. That these aspiring rock and roll artists saw this great blues music coming from the U.S. and thought, we could do something with this. We want to emulate it, And there's a whole slew of British artists that do blues in rock better than Americans ever did. I don't know. So
Well, Led Zeppelin. I mean, you want to talk about Led Zeppelin? Psh, I don't think there's been any band since now that has done what Led Zeppelin has. I mean, I have every single one of their albums.
yeah,
It it's just it's a different time. I really feel that the culture that you're surrounded by really shifts the way that you think and
yeah.
the way that you create. And I feel like that's a very important part of understanding where music culture comes from.
Yeah, I think that as one last thing I could say, I could attest to Led Zeppelin, is that so kids who are playing guitar, both boys and girls and everyone else, and they're not trying to learn how to play Foster the People or Glass Animals. Not knocking on those artists, like they're trying to learn Led Zeppelin, and they're listening to Jimi Hendrix, and their music is, I'm 51 years old. Their music is older than I am, and so the music that is 55 going on 60 years old is still the standard if you were trying to learn how to play guitar, whether you're 12 years old or 35 or 8 or 50. That says something about the music, the quality of the music. And I'm not. That's not for me to say that. Well, old music is better than the crap that's playing today. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there are
Right.
standards in certain things, certain traditions in music that aren't broken, that have not been bested by new music, and I think that's the way it should be. Maybe.
Yeah. It's just a way of a different perspective. Um, Andy, I have to say it has absolutely been a pleasure to have you on. It's just just incredible. Like there are things about music I had no idea, and I just learned them today from you. So thank you. Let me ask you something. For any of our listeners, where can they find your work? Like your book and the stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, so my book, 90 Days in the 90s, a rock and roll time travel story, is very music heavy. I mean, it's not like you need to be an expert on Fugazi or Ned's Atomic Dust to enjoy it. I tried, like the movies we mentioned, to make it very accessible and make it, you can tag along. You find it at 90daysin90s.com. If you're in the US, order from me directly. I'll sign you a copy and send you some swag. Or you can find it on Amazon. If you're one of the people like me and you want to support your local bookstore record store, they will order it from you for you, and they can definitely get it. Otherwise, follow me on social media if you want. Sporty Frye, Frye. It's Fry with an E. I'm on Twitter and I'm on Insta as well. And starting to put up some more music-related content. Just fanboy shit and things that are very nostalgic. So yeah, follow me on social media or 90daysin90s.com, or my book's out there. And if you're in Chicago, I probably will be at a farmers market or music fest sometime near you.
I love that. And definitely check out Andy. His work is incredible, and I honestly cannot wait to read this book either. It seems so cool. I'm like, oh my god. So for all of y'all that want to learn more, be sure to like and subscribe. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube at Lost in the Groove Pod. So with that, we'll catch you on the next one. Stay groovy, my friends. Adios.
Rock on.